for the first eco art activity called A Moving Experience by Teresa Sweeney, published in 2013, helped provide the framework for the activity, but it was personalized to contain the following intention: how does one heal after saying goodbye to a child? To help me cope with Piggy's loss. Here is the narrative of the experience. I went down at the lake, which is very close to my new home. I noticed the water first and feel most attracted to it. It is a freshwater lake that stretches for so far that there is no sight of land on the other side. I know it to be vast beyond my fathoming, and yet beyond that I can't seem to capture its essence wholly, no matter how many times I have come to visit there. I seem to find that I am drawn to visiting the lake time and time again, because when I am in the vicinity it breaks my heart not to come and visit and feel the movement and energy. The water and wind beckon my presence toward their interacting dance. When I am there it feels like powerful messages are contained in the ethers, lovingly lent unto me with a considerable level of urgency. I felt this day, fittingly breathless and small, standing beside the waves as they ebbed and flowed, intermittently sloshing and crashing. Almost like I was being shushed comfortingly like a baby, and in that moment I realized that as long as I live and let live I would be safe within both stillness and motion. I felt that I could find contentment living in the wake of others as we impact each other and our energy of simply being. I noticed in the stillness that a small gathering of icebergs were forming between the solemn waves. I felt the stillness in the sand that skirted the edge and the icy forming layers between the sand and the sea. I further felt the stillness in the seagulls who rode the slow and softly swaying waves as they tucked into themselves as if deceptively comfortably warm. So, taking the cue of everything around me, I settled in, comfortably lulled into not thinking too hard or too deeply, and fell into a near state of fluidly restful sleep. It suddenly seemed that falling into surrender might be okay, and I enjoyed the waves beside me. The motion within me felt like a parallel power to the surging mighty beat of force alongside me, awakening my awareness of the wondrous awe of being alive. Noticing this inner movement helped cue me into the areas inside of me that needed comforting, love and kindness imparted. The stillness allowed me to witness the friction of flow inside, motivating me. It was also a profound realization for me to sense that the lake and the sky were always moving in patterns and waves of a different pace intimately, the wind touching the waves and even going as far as to carry the water from the surface of the earth up into itself, the two transforming and making room for the other, changing, assimilating. This was even visible in the sky as the steam rose and the warmer water stirring softly, forming graying clouds rising from the gelatinous and wobbling waves. I always feel aware of this interplay of earth and sky, water and air, as an ongoing love affair because of how often I visit the lake. Approaching myself and my boyfriend can spend much time here soon once the ice melts. I was feeling mixed emotions, toggling between slight melancholy and the yearning for a safe and comfortable rest, where for short periods it might be okay to rest within the world. I felt the catharsis sweeping through me. I believed at that point that perhaps rocking and swaying my body slowly like the lake might help to understand the sea, and when I did it, it reminded me of a chilly icy bowl of slowly tipping gelatin, soothing me. It evoked memories of being held by my grandmother when I was very small and drawing near to her, and as I re-entered those moments of memory, my thoughts and feelings wholly adopted that same sense of restfulness, washing away the melancholy. I continued to sway for a while, attracted to how it felt. When I got home I decided to create an image related to my experience, Figure 1. To create the artwork by pouring water directly onto a blank paper and then dabbing my hands in watered-down acrylic paints and rubbed them back and forth across the watery page. Then I carried the wet paint water upward on the page, simulating how the steam escaped into the wintry air. When the paint eventually felt metaphorically, it reminded me of the way the clouds eventually dissipated as they rose high in the air. Then, I touched my fingers in the white paint and simulated the motion of the seagulls riding the waves and the stillness of the frosty icy water dancing across the surface. The wet paint was slippery and smooth in a similar way to the water of the lake. I named Figure 1, Land of sea and sky intermingling in icy stunning stillness. Girls go for a ride on icebergs beside and steam of dispersed warmth. Winter time rising. I felt that this marriage of sky and water through the rocking of the sea and rocking of me were all metaphors for how we are all united. Though we may have departed connectivity, we are all still exchanging energies and a part of one another perpetually. This epiphany brought comfort to my grief. The second eco-art activity, also derived from Teresa Sweeney's 2013 work, was called Weaving Oneness, and it required 2 sittings. In the first sitting I drew a representational picture of the energy of myself and my cat named Bunny as we lay beside each other. She was a beautiful companion and a presence so soft and gentle and purring that I felt moved by our cuddling emotionally. I could feel through her furry softness her capacity for expressing a maternal sense of love when she mothered kittens, and that feeling surrounded me. Therefore, for this drawing an abstract piece suited me. Shifting my attention and focusing on drawing a representation of myself for the next part of the imagery, I imagined myself as a vortex or portal that could lapse into the realms of daydreams with greater ease than other people. I didn't perceive this meant disconnection, rather it seemed a deeper sense of connection to all things seen and unknown. When I saw the art starting to take shape, the image of a vortex appeared and I felt myself overcome with tears for having witnessed it occurring during art making. I also saw the tears forming on the page and sensed that I was connected to all things within the web of creation. The representation of Bunny's fur appeared so soft and vibrational surrounding the perimeter of the image. I also saw in the pseudo-self-portrait portion of Figure 1 a blossom forming. This emerging image reminded me of a recent statement a writing coach shared with me. She said she believes that we are all different varieties of flowers and that we are all meant to bloom at a different time and in different ways. So we don't need to worry if we are keeping up with the blooms or the patterns of other varieties of blossoms in this world, for if we did, the world would be drab and not as perpetually colorful and unique. This was a lesson in trust which I felt was present in the drawing. In the second drawing within this activity, Figure 3, I was with my boyfriend's family and we were on a hike. We had to come a long way through icy paths amidst the sounds of crows calling. It felt like they were carrying messages of resilience despite the fact that my boyfriend's dad is very ill with cancer and it seems death is knocking on his door and crows are a symbol of dying. It also made me think of my grandma aging gradually toward her end days as well. Yet, the sun was out and we found some very beautiful things to make each of us grateful to be out in the wilds. My boyfriend and our niece climbed a few tall fallen trees along the riverbank that created a bridge, and my boyfriend's mom and I were drawn to the planted pines and how the sun pierced through the slits, warming the soft pine needle path between the trunks. We all slid along the icy patches, some starting with a run, and we also stood in the sun soaking in the rays in meditation. The spot where we stopped were within a beautiful prairie next to patches of pampas grass swaying in the wind. We sat in the circle of benches playing with dried stalks of grass while I drew, and I felt their energy and the energy of the winds causing the pampas grass all around us to sway beautifully. My boyfriend's mom said that it was a vibrational energy we all shared, being out there in the winds and the sun, feeling the connectivity. When I drew Figure 3, I felt embraced and also simultaneously wanted to also experience it in my own inner way. I felt like they were trying to busy themselves while I drew, and for a bit I felt forlorn that I did not have more time alone with my thoughts. We have much family coming around weekly, and sometimes I just feel the need for less interaction and more introspection, and so it felt good for a space of stillness as it happened. The intention of this second image was to feel myself present in nature and to draw that resonating sense of presence. When I finished the 2 art pieces, per the instructions of the activity as laid forth by Teresa Sweeney, 2013, to create an interwoven image using the strips of both pieces. I had a hard time with that cutting process. Even within the thanatology studies, I had yet to come to my own sense of peace through non-death bereavement, despite with all of the tools I have been granted. It was hard to cut myself apart from the depictions of Bunny's energy and the stalks of pampas grass from the wind and air. It felt this was similar metaphorically to what happened during death, a distinct severing of energy. When I put it back together into a third image, figure 4, I struggled through that process very much as well. I felt like I was doing it wrong when the strips did not fit in tidily, and I was saddened by the changes in the things having been cut up. Despite the fact that I saw that myself and Bunny were still there in pieces and that the grass was still there in pieces, it was hard to let it go of the original form of the art, but I recognized the need to complete the woven piece. I realized through the process that in other areas of life I was also in deep mourning over what was happening in my life. Further than that, I also felt grief over the changes occurring to our planet and the chance that someday the pampas grasses might not be there. I also felt empathy for the 10 deer who tentatively traveled past us in the very small inner city park during the day of our visit, because it seemed their lives were constantly disturbed by wandering people along the paths. It made me want to just leave that park and never return, allowing them an undisturbed home, but I realized that by abiding to this belief made me wonder if could still visit and do so respectfully. I felt then a desperate need to connect to the natural world and to articulate it through my life's work, and yet I felt afraid that there will be no financially supportive and resonant way to conduct life this way. I realized after this experience that I may have had a role to play, protecting, nurturing and caring for other forms of life based on my sensitivities. I have seen countless videos of people who are so immersed in wanting to own other creatures, plants or other beings, yet they tether them and tie them to things and treat them in ways that are oppressively unacceptable. Our inherent curiosity over them forced creatures to become slaves to human wishes and wills rather than nature. It made me feel very confused as to how to be a better advocate and strengthens my will toward this work. On a head level, I realized that I have more work to go to deal adequately with my studies of thanatology creatively. It makes me understand that work like this reminds me of the fleeting life force I possess and the ability to do something with it. On a heart level, I am left with this longing to be able to protect, cherish and to live and let live. On a hand level, I hope to learn to make activities that might help others to process this interconnectivity and marry it with the lessons of thanatology, the fleeting nature of life and the blessedness of other lives as contributing to our sense of what life means. It strengthened my resolve toward finding the way to the loving work of planetary loving energy. Eco Art. Poem inspired by time in nature. In the great storm we churn in tumult, our colliding voices heard for great distances, whistling, roaring, moaning. Spirits in distress, we are the clashing tides, rising high battered into flight. Above the rocky shores, blaming each other for the fury of unrest, though we have been pushed by the galloping hordes of loss, compounding failures, resounding distance created by pain upon pain, a mist of forlorn separation. The third eco-art activity I engaged in was also by Teresa Sweeney, published in 2013, called The Shadow Knows. The work unfolded on a semi-sunny and unusually warm day in March. The shadows I found to explore in the activity were cast on the fence in my backyard. One shadow was that of a pine bush in our yard and the other was my own shadow. The specific shapes of the pine were difficult to decipher artistically, using the paper and oil pastels. The image contained fluidity and complexity in a design greater than my words or art could fully explain enough in detail in order to allow the reader or listener to fully appreciate them wholly. What I was actually able to capture is visible in Figure 5. When I spoke to the shadow, for the activity, I found that the shadow was telling me that when the scrutiny and observation of the sun faded, the shadows too then faded into the everyday gray mutually. This revelation occurred as the sun faded behind some clouds. As I stepped back from illustrating, a shorter shadow version of me in the image evoked a sense of a former version of me cast on the wall. Since I was standing some distance away, the little me shadow looked stumpy and short. When I engaged in conversation with the little shadow of me, it said, "Remember when you were little like me and the things you wished you could do were restrained. Now is the time." Both shadows seem to say now is the time, and when you learn to love who you are, then the shadowy parts will merge with the fading light of scrutiny receding and naturally balancing things. In this knowing you will come to understand that countering your greatness of shadow and viewing it as an inherent downside may eliminate an imperfection that may be a blessing when viewed from the outside. I also sensed that the little me imparted the message that understanding age versus youth physically as compared to age and youth mentally are key elements to consider when viewing shadows too. I was very grateful as the shadows morphed and changed in the wind and the light as if they were alive. It made it interesting to trace them because of how much they moved and shifted. The picture visible in Figure 5 made me feel excited.